Welcome back, GovEcon students. It is Mr. King again, and we are going to look into the presidency in this video lecture number 2. And today, in particular, we're going to look at creating the presidency, what the Founding Fathers did, what they looked at in terms of historical precedent, and then how they created a very unique institution that is the office of the President of the United States, which gave the executive branch some considerable degrees of powers, but also limited those powers. So we're looking at this balancing act between a strong executive, which, as you remember, the Articles of Confederation were missing, and then how they limited those powers. And then we'll be looking more into the presidency in the next couple of video lectures. So why don't we flip to the first screen here, and we notice here a king on the right. You see in the ermine robes and a scepter and a crown. And so one of the things that the Founding Fathers had as precedents for executive power were obviously the kings and the emperors of Europe, from which we had broken away. We fought a revolution against King George III, the tyrannical king who subjected us to all sorts of abuses and usurpations, to use Thomas Jefferson's words. And they also had colonial governors who were operating in the different colonies, the 13 colonies. And so those were the two major sources of precedent that we can look to. And then there were new developments unique to North America, particularly after the United States and the Confederation Congress declared new states in May of 1776. And in most of those new states, in fact, they created weak governors with strong legislatures. Therefore, we go into the Articles of Confederation period, and as you know very well from your recent efforts and studies, that there was a one-year rotating president who was kind of a joke, didn't really do much, oversaw sessions of Congress, but that was really all. The president, under the Articles of Confederation, had no real authority, power, and Congress had all the power, and really the states really had all the power, and they sent representatives to Congress. It was a unicameral body, and there was no real strong leader. Now, if we go back to a figure like John Locke, the number one guru and fan of limited government and parliamentary restraints of kings, John Locke himself believed, however, that in times of crisis or national emergency, that the king could in fact violate or even break the law. That is, executives during a national crisis, emergency, particularly war we would think of, had awesome powers. And certainly John Locke liked limited government. We in fact used John Locke's ideas to put together our own constitutional arrangement. However, there were times when strong executive action is required. And that's something that the founders would look at, especially after the experience with the figurehead, sort of joke president of the Articles of Confederation. So let me just move to the next slide then, and we can see that the Founding Fathers began to consider seriously the executive branch after Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts in the 1780s. We really begin to see that the nation's elites, including Washington and Hamilton and James Madison himself, felt that there needed to be a stronger executive. And one of the issues that quickly came up at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia was the need for such a strong executive that would provide stability. Yet they didn't want to have too strong an executive who might become a tyrant like the European monarchs, and in particular George III. So this august group of men that met in Philadelphia began to really lay the foundations of a balanced executive, and that's really going to be the cornerstone of what I call the American political tradition, and that is this idea of balance. We've seen balance and or what we might say compromise to be present, and that really is one of the cornerstones, the keystones of the American political system and or tradition. So the Founding Fathers had to invent a new type of executive, since the examples from Europe often were not satisfactory. Weak governors or weak executives with a strong legislature, also not satisfactory. So here we go. So they meet in the summer of 1787, and they really begin to discuss the criteria for holding office, and that's one of the things we're going to look at right now. Let me just scroll down to my notes. So one of the things that they quickly agreed on with regards to the office of president is that the president or the candidate for president would have to be 35 years of age, would have to be a resident 14 years in the United States as opposed to 7 for the House and 9 for the Senate, and also a natural-born citizen of the United States. That is, could not be foreign-born and then come to the United States, become a citizen possibly, and then run for office. Natural-born. Now that seems simple, but why all the natural-born business? And if you think this is, something that was just limited or I should say really part of the original discussion of the president in 1787, you're wrong. Many people, particularly conservative Republicans, felt that Barack Obama himself was not a natural-born citizen of the United States. His father's from Kenya, his mother from Kansas. He was born in Hawaii and does have a birth certificate from the state of Hawaii, which proves he was born in the United States. But many believe, and this movement is called the birther movement, that Obama somehow was faking it, that the documents were forged and not authentic, and therefore Obama's not a U.S. citizen. Therefore, according to the Constitution and this agreement of the Founding Fathers, he couldn't really be president. So it is interesting that this natural-born business is still something that we hear about. Now, why is it that natural-born was a prerequisite? Well, the Founding Fathers did not want foreign-born candidates to run or hold the position of president in the United States, because they feared that foreign-born candidates, people, that is, men, would bring foreign ideas, foreign influences, and or pressures to bear on the government of the United States. So to eliminate the possibility of interference from European countries at this time, they put in this natural-born requirement. So who would choose or elect the president was the next tricky, thorny question. And the other question that you see is, how long would a president serve? And these were very difficult questions that divided the Founding Fathers in Philadelphia. And it really took almost the entire 4 months for the Founding Fathers to resolve the specific conflicts and come up with answers. And initially, many agreed with Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and he's the dude who created the compromise, known as the Great Compromise, between big states and small states. Many agreed with Roger Sherman when he said that the executive was little more than an institution or a vehicle for carrying out the will of the legislature. So here we see the bias of the Articles of Confederation still present. The legislature is the primary branch, according to many, and Sherman promoted this idea in Philadelphia. So that meant that the legislative branch should even select the executive, and that was Sherman's idea, that the legislature would select the president. However, this idea went against the idea of separation of powers. Now, had we been in England under a unitary system where Parliament selects its prime minister, all would have been fine. However, in the United States, there was some concern. Sorry for that brief interruption. So Roger Sherman's plan was to have the legislature select the president, but that would have been a violation of the separation of powers. So that idea really didn't go very far, or in fact, it caused all sorts of upset and angst, and it was nixed. Then we have the next proposal that was really put forth by James, as I call him, Jimbo Wilson, and Gouverneur Morris, including and along with Jimmy Madison of Virginia. And they pushed the idea of a president being elected by the people, and this would guarantee the presence of the sovereign people, government for the people, by the people, of the people, but it would also guarantee the independence of the executive branch. That is, it would not be selected from the legislative branch, and this would confer a great deal of power on the executive branch, which could then act as a check on the legislative branch. That makes sense? Good. I think we've gotten that idea of separation and checks and balances down quite well. And in this case, in this scenario put forth by Wilson and Morris and Madison, the sovereignty would remain with the people, and I just mentioned that. So that sounded good, and these three men proposed it, but there were still concerns and doubts and reservations. How could the common folk, busy with work and family, with limited education and knowledge of the political affairs and process, know anything about how to elect a president wisely? So then it became a question of who can elect wisely. That is, who's in a position to select good candidates. And so the idea of democracy, that is, power to all the people, was really then regarded as dangerous. And people liked the idea on one hand, but didn't really trust the people on the other. So Wilson and Morris and Madison's idea was again going to be put to the test. And in fact, what we have is a special committee, oh yay! A committee on postponed and unresolved parts was put together to solve this very issue. And what they did, again, was come up with a compromise. And so this committee met, and the compromise idea was the Electoral College, that each state would have the same number of votes as its combined House and Senate delegations. Each state has 2 senators plus the House members based on the population of the state. Each state would select a number of electors, send them to the College of Electors, and the College of Electors would actually do the voting for president. Now, the electors were supposed to represent how the people of their state voted. So it's not like the electors have free reign to say, we like this guy, we don't like that guy. Our state voted for this guy, but we're not going to vote for him. Now, the electors are sort of bound to vote for the people, for the candidate that the state voted for. But anyway, so there's this indirect mechanism called the Electoral College to select a president. This was a compromise that was, in fact, satisfactory to most members of the convention, and in the closing days in September, they agreed, inked the whole deal. The Constitution was signed on September 17th. You might remember the date, September 17th, 1787. And that was but the one last issue was, hey, what happens when no candidate for the presidency wins a majority of electoral votes? Well, again, Roger Sherman, that guy again from Connecticut, and Hugh Williamson, proposed that if there was no electoral winner, that is a majority of the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives would have the final say, and the House would vote by state, with each state having 1 vote for the president among the presidential candidates running in that election. That actually occurred in 1800 and in 1824. And almost again in 2000 before the Supreme Court intervened in that election of 2000 in favor of George W. Bush. Well, we're out of time. It's about 12 and a half minutes. Went over a little bit, but at least we now have a president. We know how the president is elected. We know some of the historical precedents that the Founding Fathers looked at and rejected, and how they are going to then come up with a strong executive, but a limited executive. And we're going to deal with that issue, strong executive, limited executive, the next time on the King Channel. That's all for today. Signing off is your favorite Gov and Econ teacher, Mr. King. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.